Let's start. Way up to the podium here. Morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to call to order this Board of Johnson County Commissioners and ARPA Committee special meeting to order on this Tuesday, May 31st, 2022 at 10 o'clock a.m. If we could, let's do roll call.
Brian Beard,
Here.
Ron Deere,
Here.
Jonathan Myers,
Here.
Rob Henderson,
Here.
Kevin Walls,
Here.
Ron West.
Present. I'm impressed you do that by memory.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
really good.
What's by looks?
Just
Well-
look left.
Yeah, just look.
And which, by the way, is the way you're supposed to do roundabouts.
What's that?
Look left.
Look left.
Yeah. If no one's coming left, you can go. If there's someone coming from your left, hold your position, please.
If you're doing the one there at Smith Valley, you better be looking right because they'll be in that right lane and then try to go this way. And the next thing you know, you got somebody on your right fender
That's true.
permanently.
We'll get it right one of these days. First on the agenda, consideration of funding grants for local food banks. I think, Ron, you.
Yes, this is a presentation about what is, first of all, definition, what is food insecurity? Person is food insecure when they lack regular access to enough safe and nutritious food for normal growth and development and an active and healthy lifestyle. This may be due to unavailability of food and or lack of resources or money to obtain the food. What are the effects of food insecurity? Food insecurity can have a wide impact depending on each individual's circumstances. Some of the most common yet complex effects of food insecurity include serious health and mental health complications, especially when people facing hunger are forced to choose between spending money on food, medicine, or medical care. It also is a damage to a child's ability to learn if they don't have enough food and grow. A difficult decision such as choosing between paying for food and heat, electricity, rent, or transportation are one of the additional effects of food insecurity. Question: does Johnson County have a need? And the answer is yes. The Johnson County population, according to the 2020 census, was 161,765. And Gleaner's Food Bank, which serves 10 of the 17 food banks in our county, the numbers from them is 19,000 people, or 11.7% of our population is food insecure. Of that, 5,187 children under the 18 are, or 13% of that 19,000 are children, and 1,900 seniors, or 7.9% of the 19,000 are food insecure. Those in particular, as I did more research, are impacted because of fixed income and rising costs of medical care. In 2021, most recent data from Gleaners, 4,687,000 pounds of food were distributed to those in need. Again, these numbers do not include all 17, they only include the 10. So we know all of these numbers are greater than what they've been quoted today. Since 2019, the demand has increased by 75% among all categories. At this time, I said 17, it's 6. At this time, there are 16 food pantries serving Johnson County. Suggestion that I'm putting forward to the committee is to allocate $100,000 of ARPA funds for distribution by a grant application process with an award limit of no more than $10,000 per agency. This is being done in other communities throughout Indiana and throughout the United States. It's covered under the regulatory funds, assistance to nonprofits, and to households that experienced increased food insecurity, and under the impacted household section of the potential funding. And I'm prepared to answer any questions I might be capable of answering about it.
Ron, do you have a list of these pantries?
I do. I didn't make a copy of it. I've got current list. And the difference of those who participate in gleaners as opposed to those who don't is that gleaners, as part of their charter, you cannot have any obligation that has to be met to receive food. It has to be totally free. So if a church, says that we want you to go to one of their sessions, they certainly are distributing to the community, and people do go to that particular company or that particular church. But Gleaners does not let them participate if they say, you have to do a moment of prayer or anything like that. And then some just choose not to participate. There are other advantages of being part of Gleaners, and that's the ability for them to purchase commodities at cost, I believe with a 1% administrative charge by Gleaners. But the information I got was totally from Gleaners, but they made a point to me that they estimate unofficially that the actual demand for the food insecure is probably 20 to 25% higher if you add the 6 that are not part of Gleaners organization, because it's totally voluntary organization. And if you want some example of who participates, Edinburgh Food Pantry, Franklin Community Schools Cub Pantry, Church Food Pantry of Johnson County, which I've observed up here on Commerce Drive, quite an operation. The Hub, and that is a church, Grace Point Church in Whiteland, Great Harvest Food Pantry, Grace Assembly of God in New Whiteland, Our Lady of Greenwood and Greenwood, St. Francis and Clara Parish on Olive Branch Road, the Social of Greenwood, members that are food pantries that are not part of of them is Trafalgar has Lord's Locker. So we have food pantries throughout the entire county that are serving those in need.
So have the municipalities done anything in this regard that you're aware
As
of?
far as contributions, not that I'm aware of.
from ARPA?
They've arranged for banks to occur, and I believe Greenwood did something not so long ago where they arranged for it to be on city property. If there is, I'm not aware of it, but this came together fairly quickly because of our short turnaround time. It had to be on the agenda a day after or 2 days after we met last. So additional research would be done. Kokomo is doing it, and they're doing it through a grant process. And that was sort of the one that I looked at as a sample of similar potential service. And it is not that difficult. They just ask certain questions about what the grant is.
I just throwing things out there. I wonder if the distribution, if we so vote to do this, if the distribution should be a weighted type of distribution based on the number served or something along those lines, or is it just going to be a flat distribution per?
It was a grant dispersed by, get this, a committee. I know how much our chairman loves to have committees, but Kokomo uses a committee, a small committee that after they go through the grant process, they have like 10 parts of they have to show that they're 501(c)(3) and several other things like that, and then what their annual distribution is. It's included in the grant process. But this, I would take the lead, and I would, get the information if we decide that we wanted. This is just to throw it out there and see if there's an interest.
I think and Sheena and I had some discussion on this, and I think Emily has some ability on that
Certainly does, yes.
portion that she could help with as far as grant applications and things like that, or grant administrators. So I think any of that is possible if it's chosen to do this process.
Hey, Ron, do you have a list handy of the serving pantries? I just take a look at it. I mean, I know we distribute from the beef board, we distribute to some of these pantries during the pandemic. We've taken, a couple of cattle and had them ground up in a hamburger and actually
Right.
distributed them throughout. We also include like senior services on this because they've got a huge need.
Right.
Okay, they're on here, but they're not highlighted.
Yeah, the highlighted ones are the ones that are participating as a gleaner partner.
I know there's some that do. I know during Mount Pleasant Christian Church, I know that was Center Grove diverted during the pandemic. They were already under contract.
Right.
For all their food for all the kids, but the kids never went to school. So they distributed that to Mount Pleasant Church and they've got a heck of an operation up there.
Oh,
I know that.
anybody that's had the opportunity to visit any of these, I did it last year just out of curiosity, and it's just amazing what the different ones do. And like I said, the one Aaron Church food pantry up here that's got the tent outside of it, they just flow right through. But I didn't have time to do, any background research other than what I got here today.
So Ron, the numbers that you supplied us with were provided by gleaners?
And they were only, yes, and they were only for their ones that are marked on that list.
And so that if you only take the gleaner participating entities without any knowledge or effect that all of the others on this list that aren't a part of gleaners, I don't know how you could support what they're giving you as food insecurity. I know for a fact that Johnson County Senior Services in 2021 distributed almost 400,000 pounds of food alone to seniors. And then when you take in the Lord's Locker and Mount Pleasant, and so on and so forth.
Well, the need is
I'm not going
greater.
to say that the need is being met, but it would for sure change the dynamics of the numbers you presented. And then I always question numbers where they give you round numbers and then all of a sudden they give you an exact number. As your example, 19,000 people, 1,900 seniors, but when it comes to children, they got 5,187. So I always question how they put those numbers together. But here's another area where it's one of those things that's hard to say no to. But I'm not so sure that in our county that we have that need. And I would for sure not want to vote for anything that didn't include all of these others that aren't a part of gleaners. They all do a wonderful job. There's no question about the intent of what they're doing and the effect that they're having on the communities. But I don't know how you could
Well, I
make grants available to only the gleaners.
no, I didn't say that at all. I said,
No, I know you didn't, but you, at the bottom, it said there are 16 food pantries. And then we only talked about the gleaners
no,
participants.
I defined exactly the information you used. I said that gleaners could only give numbers for their organizations that are part of their organization. The demand is much greater, not less. And you include the numbers that you just stated. We know that, I know from doing this research, that it is much greater. Gleaners estimate at least 20%, if not even more, because they don't have any numbers to put in their data. So that the demand is much greater than what was quoted. And the percentages were based upon pounds delivered, which they converted 1.5 pounds per person. So that was actually their conversion of how many pounds were distributed by their organizations, not by the entire group that is meeting the need. So this is a particular case where the numbers are low. And you're correct, they are probably at least, I say 20, and conservatively maybe even greater than that, but didn't have time to put together what the other organizations have passed out.
Well, I think if you open up a grant process anyway, that it would be open to all
It is.
participants. So
Yeah,
at
that's
that
what I'm
point, so,
suggesting,
yeah,
right.
I think it would be
Yeah, I'm not suggesting, I'm just saying my statistics were only from Glen.
and I understand that. I'm just saying, I don't think it would make a difference. You
No,
know,
it
if we
doesn't.
open up a grant process, it would have to be fair to all those
That's correct.
participants. So I think we're good there. Any other communication?
Well, then, if there are no further questions, then I would make a motion that we consider allocating 100,000. If anybody wants to suggest more, we certainly could consider, I mean, it would be a thoughtful consideration, but a minimum of 100,000 of the ARPA funds for distribution through a grant process to all eligible Johnson County food pantries.
I'll second that motion.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
I would like, I love the idea and the application process. I think we can make that both reasonable, in its requirements.
Yeah.
To be met, not to pour through pages and pages of data to approve or consider a grant. But also would keep in mind, and I didn't see it on there, not it would be, but like the Good Cheer Fund comes to mind. They raise money through one particular event, but that is spread across the county as well, and substantially food and baskets are deployed in the county residents in need. So if we could give consideration to an entity like that may be more just loosely organized. I don't know that they're formally a 501c3, but that would be my only discussion point, but certainly in favor of this idea.
And this is not to be limiting, this is to be broad based. And
Yeah.
there is that, and the subcommittee, certainly if that's what the desire is of this committee to work with our grant writer to I'm looking to make this simple, but to make it fair. And and what I've seen on the examples from Kokomo and a few other cities is just, getting some information from them that they're not just one day a week, one day a year,
So two things. One, we're talking here primarily about 16 food pantries, but I can assure you, once this is publicized, that there's going to be several more that we either didn't know about or didn't incorporate that are going to come forward.
I know of some, Ron.
And so, and then you mentioned, I think in the beginning, that it would be the grant application would be based on a prorated amount based on service. I'd be more inclined to use a flat rate, in other words, a simple division of the total.
And you're correct, Ron, that there is one, for example, Little Food Pantry that has Franklin and two houses from Greenwood that is a neighborhood food pantry. So, this was, the purpose of this discussion was just to get it out there, not to get into the weeds is my favorite statement. So that would be down the road.
I think a lot of this can be advised up and discussed in the subcommittee.
Yeah.
I think I would like to see whoever's on that committee just inform back to the board what they come up with before anything is released.
I actually would be before an allocation by the council, I would assume, and that'd be probably Sheena the best.
Yeah, it'll have to go to council in July as far as, assuming it gets to the commissioners via ordinance. It'll go through the council in July. Emily and I can work on a preliminary grant application for perusal by this committee or some smaller committee that seems maybe to be formed. And we can go from there.
And if there are volunteers, I'd be,
Good. Many of these 503Cs are broad throughout the state in their services. should we consider just that amount that goes into this county? Or should we just think of it as a broad application? And that, again, is, but I just wanted to throw that out there for the subcommittee.
Well, if we may, I would like to suggest as part of this discussion about this, if this goes forward with approval today, that we go ahead and establish a small subcommittee just to get into the weeds on it and bring it back to, if there's volunteers that want to serve on it from this board, at the minimum, one of the attorneys, which of the two you choose to put it to, our grant writer, myself, and whoever else might want to participate, just to get it going. Is there anybody else that wants to serve?
Well, I mean, 3 of us could work on it. That's fine.
I mean,
If no one else, I mean, everybody, time is at a premium.
Yeah, I think at this point, I don't know that we want to try to commit other people's time at this point, but I think the suggestion of the legal and Ron Deere and the grant administrator working on that would be, I would think would be enough to get us started.
I agree.
You know me in committees, anytime you want to drag something out, you appoint a committee. And I've said that for years and I'm going to continue to say it. So,
Well, this is for information, bringing it.
no,
back.
understood. But I think we have, with the grant administrator and you and one legal, I think we probably got that covered at this point. But that would be my discussion on, I guess, I know $100,000 sounds like a lot of money, but in the scheme of things
It's a drop in the bucket.
is 100,000 really enough if we have good, solid grant applications coming in? I just think
After
if we're gonna do it, let's do it. If we're not, let's don't. And I think 100,000 just in the scheme of things, it falls under the regulatory bucket. So we're solid there right now.
In this particular case, it was not coming in with something that would be shot down as too great, but anything that would be at another number would certainly be reasonable. And if you just did an equal divide, it's less than 5,000 at 100,000, per organization. Some organizations are larger. For some that would be a major input. For others, it would be, not so much, but I certainly suggest if I would take back my motion and modify it, if someone has an higher amount, it would be acceptable.
Why don't we start with the 100,000 to see how this application process goes? And at a later date, if it does get some ground and takes off, we can increase that.
Whatever, yeah.
I think just set 100,000 for right now. Because I think there's some money, there'll be money, it'll be shifting around quite a bit on this. So I would, and if there's some left at the end, we can put some more in, or we can revisit it at a different time. So
That's certainly acceptable.
With that said,
Well, I was prepared to vote yes, but if you're talking about expanding it, then I might have some reservations. Here's my biggest concern. I think we're moving away from the purpose or the intent of this ARPA money. In the beginning, we talked about trying to utilize it where all of the people in the county would benefit from it. We would do things that were more of a one-time expenditure. In other words, bricks and mortar or road repair and things of that nature. I can see, once we approve this, then I can see groups coming forward on housing, clothing, transportation, and maybe a variety of other needs that are out there in our community. How are we going to deal with those people when they come forward?
Well, in response to that, Ron, I'm not going to like my response, but there are some additional agenda items that I did not bring forward because I didn't want to be the keeper of always bringing agenda items for. But under the ARPA funds, insecurity, housing insecurity, food insecurity are eligible and allowable expenses under a regulatory. You're correct that potential is there to do those if we choose to do so. I haven't brought them forward at this point in time. Doesn't mean that others might consider bringing it forward, or even myself, because we have a problem with housing insecurity, homelessness in Johnson County. Bridges of Johnson County presents to us information that if we dig into it and read it, well, it's shocking to me how much there is a homeless problem in Johnson County. ARPA funds are allowed to do that. I don't remember myself as part of the ARPA committee ever saying that ARPA money should be allocated only to bricks and mortar, nor are we on the $3 million that's been suggested for mental health in previous meetings, limiting it to bricks and mortar. That 3 million was for programs, as I understand it, Commissioner Walls, not the 8 million, but the 3 million that was for mental health, if I understand where that came. So I don't agree that. My belief is that these ARPA funds are broad and should not be limited to just bricks and mortar. That's just my opinion.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, we have a motion on the floor and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Consider funding for additional compensation for county employees. I know this has been on the docket a couple times, and I think some things have changed, but anyway, we'll open that up for discussion if anybody wants to start that discussion.
I think you have to say what's changed.
It's not that anything's really changed. It's just the intent, I think, for what we have. And I want to explain this a little bit. And this is a discussion. And this is something that, of course, we've discussed before in different scenarios. But what I have looked at and considered is I know in my business with what's going on right now with inflation and with availability of products and the ability to be able to move things forward is really being hampered right now by whether we want to say the administration, we want to say COVID, whatever the excuse or cause may be. The bottom line is things have changed. Our inflationary abilities in this country is going awry. So right now, I think we're looking at 8% is what we're looking at, an inflationary amount that we're looking at. And I know in my business, we're having to deal with that, and we're having to look at employees and their wages and where we're at. And I know here at the county, we have a lot of hardworking people. I know in my business, we have a lot of hardworking people. And the difference is in my business, it's my money. And if I want to use that money to help other people that work for me, then I'm able to do that in clear and good conscience. And we are doing that. And I think as a county, being employees or employers to employees of the county, we ought to consider the same thing. We have people that make low wages here that work really hard. We have people that make better wages that work really hard. And I put them all in the same category. Inflation affects all categories. So what I ask is that we look at something to help all employees in a one-time stipend or something to help for this year and the inflationary issues that we're dealing with and the lack of being able to get certain things and things costing a lot more because of that. That we ought to look at something to help all employees, full-time and part-time, regardless of whether they were here working or not during the pandemic. I don't think that matters at this point. I think what matters is that we have people in this county that work for the county that are hurting just as much as other people. And I think we ought to look at that as employers of these people.
And in response to that, if you recall, one of the charges that was given during with the initial discussion was to put together some figures. And what I believe Commissioner Baird is stating is just who qualifies as opposed to the actual numbers. You want to, shall we, you want to use that as a basis for starting the discussion? or-
Well, these numbers really don't pertain because of the requirements that were put on these numbers. And that has changed somewhat in the proposal. And I think
Well, it'd be greater than.
if I think originally that Commissioner Walls said right at $1 million was
Yeah,
something.
and that's what I came up
was
with.
a list. I think if you look at doing an inflationary increase for all employees, including part-time employees, because they too as well suffer from the problem we're in, you're looking at about 1.7 million total.
And that's a flat rate of X
That's
amount. of-
$2,500 for all full-time employees and $1,500 for 159 part-time employees that are currently employed. Understanding that, we, again, and I know Commissioner West and I agree with a lot of what he says on this, it is we're helping only a handful of people, but it's the handful of people that we can help. Indirectly help that falls under the regulatory actions, and it would fall under the regulatory bucket used in this form. And I think we have Dan or somebody that can explain that if necessary, and I won't put him on the spot at this point, but this would fall under the regulatory bucket. So it would be something that would be considered under that, which doesn't affect the discretionary funds, which we seem to beat up a lot. And
I think for those of
in
us.
that, it would be considered retention of employees too, which is why I'm doing it at my business. I have to keep my employees. And if people are willing to give them more money due to what's going on, then I think we should be able to do that too.
I think it presents some problems for the council. Those of us that are on the council, a stipend is a one-time occurrence and it doesn't, and then it goes away. So as far as an inflationary solution, I don't think it does that. I'm not against the stipend, but it does not go towards their pensions or insurances or those other things. And it's not going to keep pace with inflation as it looms large in the near future and far future for the next couple of years. Once again, I'm not opposed to it, but I want to state a hope that I hope that the council does not use this as a means to diminish the raises that need to happen for the employees during the time of budget.
And I don't disagree with that, Jonathan. In my eyes, it's kind of like Ron said, we talk about how we use these funds, and I know Commissioner West has been against this, and I'm not bringing him up for that reason. But this is a one-time thing. We do one time for everybody, and then we've done that. It's not a continuing on that, where we're going to be going back into the ARPA funds and using it for more down the road. This is a one-time stipend. We process it like that in the way we do it, and then I can't help what the council does with that, but what I can do is I can sleep at night and get up in the morning and look myself in the mirror and say that I know we've done what we can with the funds we have, and that's what I have to live with.
So you want to give me a recommendation for what the council should do?
I think they should keep up with what we need to keep up with, but I can't determine what that is in everybody's minds. I
It
can
is
only
up for
determine what that
It's
is.
up for discussion at our next meeting.
And I'm not one of those. I think the council's done a fantastic job, and I know a lot of times they get a lot of heat for a lot of things, but
We've been there.
I think looking at the overall picture, we have to make decisions based on what we can live with. And again, you know, I said when I took this job, as long as I could get up every morning and look myself in the mirror and say I was okay, that I was going to stay another day. And so far, I've been able to do that for 9.5 years. And I'm going to continue to do that. And I would just ask that the council do the same philosophy, just be able to look yourself in the mirror and know that you've done the best you can do.
And the perspective that when we did the original numbers, there were a total of 414 total full-time employees that met that working between March 2020 and March 2021. So that number would be slightly higher. And the part-time people that met the same qualifications were 55. And then we had an estimate of over 30 that were making over the 73,000, which didn't qualify. Sheena, have you, in this case, would that change?
The updated numbers that I have from payroll last Friday are, there are currently 572 full-time employees. Active part-time employees, 159. And then if you go this route of kind of a retention pay, Dan can speak more to this. He is from Baker Tilly. He's on listening. You wouldn't have some of the constraints that premium pay would have, where there's an upper limit as far as the salary. So that would no longer.
You see
be in
Baker
play.
Tilly's here.
Yeah, he's on.
And the legality of it is not, I know where it is, and I'm glad Dan's on here and he can speak, but what I'm looking at is saying, I want to help all employees.
Yep.
And I think we can do that under the regulatory using this, but back when we were looking at, you know, those who work from home, those who work from here, and, you know, I was for it then, but I'm probably less inclined toward that as I am what's going on right now. And I think, thank God we have these funds that we can use, because I think this is the time that we should step in and help if we can. So Dan, if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I certainly appreciate the opportunity to be here remotely. I'm actually in Southern Indiana at the moment. Before I go further, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
I don't know. Can you turn it up, Jeff?
Yes. Yeah, you're good, Dan.
On this end?
Okay, thank you. So listening to the discussion, I've heard a few things. One is, can these funds be used maybe as a, you know, to sort of bolster a permanent adjustment to compensation? And we realize that that's.
He can just sit still and talk into the mic. He's bouncing back and forth. I'm hearing about every third word.
There you go. Thanks, Dan.
Plant yourself.
So you're hearing every third word from me?
Yeah, because you're kind of going back and forth away from the microphone, and that if you can just
Okay.
kind of stay at the microphone there. So I'm.
I'll try to.
Nervous energy, I have it too. I get it.
All right. I move around a lot when I speak. So with what you're trying to accomplish, I think we start with what do we want to accomplish? The premium pay allows you to recognize that the individuals that served in a risk capacity during the pandemic, which we are still in the pandemic, that you can allocate dollars through premium pay to those individuals. There are some limitations there. One is that they have to be in an at-risk position. So if they have stayed home during the entire pandemic, that's considered not at risk. And then there's also that upper bound of 1.5 times the average income. So all of those are things that the 1.5% test, we can write language to get around that. So I think we can set that aside. And if you want to use premium pay, we can certainly speak to that. But now in the final rule, under section 3, under the regulatory piece, under section 3, there are additional ways for you to use these dollars for retention, to preserve your public employees. And they speak to things like inflation, and they speak to things about retention. And so that is obviously something that we can explore here at the county. The questions that we have to answer, and again, anytime you make a decision, we have to start with the decision and then go to the guidance, make sure that it fits within the guidance, then make sure that we understand where it is on the risk scale. In other words, what's your burden for justification for this, and then proceed. So in the case of your retention pay approach, the documentation is going to require us, I'm going to pull up some language here. And again, I think it's the stuff that we can get through. But I just want to make everyone aware of it, that this isn't just a wave the wand and we write the text. There is some work that we'll have to do to make sure that we comply. And I'm sorry, I'm pulling up my email here. There it is. So, and I'm gonna read from this, and I know everyone has access to this, but recipients must be able to substantiate that the employees were likely to leave employment in the absence of retention and should document their assessment. There's a lot of other language in here, but it basically says at the end that the Treasury will presume that retention incentives that are less than 25% of the rate of base pay for an individual employee or 10% for a group are reasonably proportional to the need to retain employees. So speaking to your county attorney last week, this is stuff that we're going to want to make sure that we emphasize, and that we do our due diligence on the front end to make sure that the way that you design your retention pay does comply with the final rule, but accomplishes your needs. So long story short, this is something that we can proceed with, but we need to follow the guidance, and we need to make sure that along the way we have good communication back and forth so that we don't prematurely presume that this is an automatic approval. So let me pause there and see what questions I'm generating.
I think, Dan, I think in the amount that I was putting forward is we're well under the 25%, and we're well under the inflationary rate that we have to consider this year, if I even look at it as that. This is more to show our employees that we appreciate what they're doing. We want to keep them here working. We don't want them out looking for another job, because wages are going up, unfortunately, with everything that's going on, and it's very competitive right now, at least in my industry. So if that competitiveness is here as well, then we have to make moves to retain the good employees we have. But again, I want to make sure we understand it's well under what it really could be, or probably should be. This is just a little something to let them know, hey, we want you to stay. We want you to be happy here, and we want you to continue to work hard because we care. That's kind of the way I'm looking at it, sir. And if I would hope that would qualify as trying to retain employees, because that's what the intent is.
Then the final point that I'll make on this part of the topic is that when the documentation is written by your committee to authorize this appropriation within your ARPA budget, it'll need to be clear that it's associated with fiscal year 22. And then you can make a decision in fiscal year 23 and 24 if you want to do something similar. So, and someone earlier brought it up, but this is not a permanent adjustment to compensation. So the language will need to be clear that that is the case.
Your point being that if it's so were chosen, it could be done in 23 and 24 in some amount under the retention. Is that what you just said?
Yes, as the final rule is written, this is something that you could come back to in a future fiscal year. Again, it depends on your overall plan and the dollars that you've allocated. I know that there's several projects out there and that there may not be budget for this in future fiscal years, but you can certainly consider it. if there is.
Dan, is it fair to say that there might be a bucket of employees that would qualify under the premium pay requirements, and then a bucket of employees that may either further qualify or be eligible for the retention piece of this? Because I kind of break this down into, we got to start with a manning table of our employees and make sure that they were eligible workers, that they performed essential work. And you go through these check marks, right? And then there's the piece that is the retention comp piece. Are we calling premium pay and retention comp? I understand your intent, and I agree with Mr. Baird's intent to help all, but to me, there's kind of two sets of people here. Maybe is that?
I think, and I'll let Dan respond too, but I think we are it's this kind of the same end game. We're trying to decide which is easier to get to it. So when you say you have to define an essential worker, the government has already qualified all of our employees as essential workers. So we don't have that hurdle. And like Dan said earlier, with that kind of top limit of the 1.5 times the average salary, that is easily surmountable as well on the premium pay side. So
Okay.
I'll let Dan weigh in. I think the goal is to try to get to as many of our current employees as possible. So.
And the difference is for the committee, the 414 was in those parameters, and what Commissioner Baird is suggesting and offering here is that those numbers are no longer used as of whatever date, July 1st or whatever. It's the number of employees. It's expected to be 572 and 159, which those numbers are significantly different than those who were working during the period, because it didn't include the people, for example, in the prosecutor's office that were working from home. Now it would, as I understand it. So it broadens the scope, which I think is commendable and acceptable as far as I'm concerned. But that's what you're saying, is that the people who weren't qualified back then, now using those parameters would be qualified under retention pay. Correct?
Agreed, but I think Mr. Henderson's point is a good point. And I think what you're asking is that could some of those employees fall under one category and others of those employees fall under another category, and split those two categories to get to the same pot, same place.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah. And maybe my confusion is, Dan said earlier, we're still in the pandemic. I go back to, the very tail end of 19 and all of 20 and 2021 as people who were employed with us then that are still with us today. That's kind of a retro look at premium pay. And then henceforth, we've had inflation and things that have come up. So maybe I'm blending things that don't need to be blended.
I see your point that if the intent here is to get dollars into pockets for retention and recognition of the work done during we'll just call it the height of the pandemic, then you have a couple levers you can pull. One is the premium pay lever, which is authorized under the final rule, and the other is in section 3 under the retention groups. Neither hurdle is particularly difficult to clear, but there are some people that would not qualify for premium pay. Elected officials, for one, that's clear. But then the other one would be anyone that worked at home during the pandemic. But when we think about the duration of the pandemic, the burden to justify, I think you're talking about 1,500 to 2,000, we would need to document that the individuals work between 115 and maybe it's 150, I forget the math now, hours in a public facing role during the pandemic. So that's not a high hurdle to clear. Most of the time the documentation is required. So we would have to go to the time records and the department heads and ensure that the people actually, did work in a public facing role during the pandemic, but it's not an insurmountable hurdle. So then the majority of your employees are covered under premium pay. So for the ones that are not, then you could consider using that retention bucket. I mean, to the employees, perhaps it doesn't matter whether it's premium pay or the retention bucket because it's really about the dollars. So what we are messaging to you is that you can accomplish what you want to accomplish. There are going to be requirements no matter which path you go. There isn't one path that is significantly easier than the other. And the documentation for either path isn't insurmountable. So I think that gives you the freedom to decide, okay, we want to, as a committee, this is what we want to have happen. And then your subcommittees or your consultants, we can come back to you and say, this is how we recommend you do it, how we recommend you document your process, so that when you are audited, that when the compliance testing is done, we can check the box. Eligible employee, eligible duties, correct number of hours, and check the math.
But to make it simpler, correct me if I'm wrong, it isn't just what the committee and what the consultants and the attorneys doing. This is a major for the auditor, that we make it much simpler if we say, as of July 1st, full-time employees defined as what, 32 hours or greater, Sheena? Is that what a full-time employee is?
We don't have to do that.
Okay. Well,
we need
but,
to do that.
instead of splitting up between premium and retention, anybody that's employed as full-time at that rate, whatever it is you're suggesting, Commissioner Barrett, and if part-time at that rate, then the auditor's office doesn't have to go back and look at all these 350 hours. And it's much simpler from an administrative point, is the point I would make, of not splitting it. Is that correct, Dan, that we can do it all under the one bucket administrative approach and don't have to split it, and it'd be justified, is what I believe you just said?
You could do the entire program under the retention section 3.1 through 3.4. Yes, I think that's what you're saying.
Yes.
The entire program could be under that one area. The record keeping and the burden of proof for premium pay, all the data already exists. So it's just a matter of pulling it together. It is work, but it is not onerous.
Thank you, Dan. So the proposal, or basically what I have put under consideration for the committee, would be the $2,500. And really all I want to get to is an amount to put out there, and then how we get to there, I think can be determined. But I think and this just, I want those people to be rewarded for being here and working when we ask them to. But I also want to try to help those people outside of that due to retention and inflationary issues. So I think a combination of both is good. And I don't mean to make any more work for the auditor, but we, in clear conscience, we have to do what we have to do. I just would like to establish that amount, and the amount that I would like to establish to put toward whichever way we go at this point in time would be 1.7 million. And I know that's a lot of money, but it's a drop in the bucket really for what we have here. No, I won't make that motion. That's just my proposal.
I can't keep quiet any longer. And I think when this came up before, many of you heard my thoughts. And if you noticed a minute ago, I had my hands clasped and my head bowed. I was actually praying, because I've never had a proposition come before a body that I serve on, or a board that I serve on, that's created as much emotion in me as this. there's so many issues here that I want to address, and I'll start with what I said the last time. And nobody in this county is more supportive of the employees than I am. And I sincerely mean that, and I hope all of the employees recognize that. This county has been, in my estimation, very generous to the employees and recognized their work effort and their patriotism to the county. And we've done that in a variety of ways with the holidays and personal days, with the health benefits that they receive at a reduced premium, flexibility in recognizing when they have special needs that we accommodated them. And we've done that time and time again. When this was first proposed, it was proposed under the premise of pandemic, which now we know in retrospect was not nearly as dire and severe as it was thought to be during that period of time. But during that period of time, our employees never missed a day of work, never missed a payroll. The council was even generous in putting forth a percentage of wage and salary increases much more higher than what typically would have been done in years past. And meanwhile, while our employees were secure in their employment, a lot of the citizens of Johnson County were losing their jobs, losing their businesses. Many of them suffered a lot of hardships, single parents that weren't able to go to work, that had children they had to stay home and take care of during that period of time with no supplemental income to take care of them. And now for us to recognize a $1.7 million stipend to our employees is a real slap in the face to the taxpayers of this county. And what we've done now, because it began with the pandemic and the need that was associated with that at the time, now we've come up with supported reasoning. So we've expanded the reasoning. The pandemic didn't apparently work, and now we're talking about employee retention. I don't think that's a real issue here. I don't see a lot of employees leaving for other businesses or other means of employment. And we're talking about inflation. Inflation affects every taxpayer, every person in this county. If you want to take inflation into consideration, you have to realize that the primary reason that we have inflation in this country today is because of these ARPA funds, the $1.9 trillion that the federal government distributed to the governments of this country, put all of that money into the economy. And admittedly, it's fiat money, but put all of that money into the economy, which is in most part responsible for the inflation we're facing today. It's just hard for me to understand how we can sit and witness government doing what they do best in this regard, rewarding themselves at the expense of the citizens and taxpayers of this county. Now, if there's an employee out there that's suffering, hurting, and thinks that they can't get by without this, that they're gonna leave, that they're no longer gonna be employed here. If they want to come forward and express their concern, I'd be more than happy to listen to it. But I venture to say it'll be a short line.
Well, we know in one particular area, I see a sheriff sitting back there, and one's come forward, but one of the things that's brought to the council in the 2 years that I've been on the council is the retention problem in the sheriff's office. That they, whether it's and we have the dispatchers that I see him here, that I hear in the 9/11 committee, how many openings they have, how many do you have, Brent, right now?
We've got 6 on field.
Total of 10 openings, and that's because they have went to counties where they're paying more, is what you told us at the meetings. In the sheriff's department, they went to officers that were being paid greater. So it's difficult to come and beat that drum in a big public setting like this, but I hear it being beat as an issue. And I don't know about the health department, Betsy, but if you lost people to other departments, and we've not had that specific discussion, but.
No, we haven't lost anybody, but I've had people for the last going on 3 years that have worked above and beyond any normal job requirement. And it just seems like every time there's a chance to recognize that, I have citizens that come in and drop off food for us because they're thankful for what we have done for them, and it would just be nice to be recognized.
So I think retention is, and you lost 50% of your staff, Sheena, this last year with someone going
Oh.
to, you remember?
Yes, you're right, that is true.
So I mean, to say that we don't have a problem with retention, but I'd be interested in hearing other people's, because it tends to be at the Ron discussions.
Well, when you talk about retention, if there is a problem, and we've had that problem for a number of years in the COs, correctional officers, because of the salary, and we knew that was a problem. Maybe that's the problem of 911. That's something you would address in the budget process. You're telling me that $2,500 are going to change these people's minds? I don't buy that, and you surely can't support it. We don't have a retention problem no more than any other government entity or any business out there has. People are always looking for better employment, better wages, more security on what they're doing. That's always going to be an example. But by and large, this county does not have a retention problem. You'd be hard pressed to ever convince me of that. And if you can convince me that one department or another does have, then you ought to be addressing that, not with some stipend of taxpayers' money that you've been granted to use for the whole of the taxpayers in this county. I'm waiting.
Ron, I think you make a blanket statement when you say the money is to be used for the all taxpayers of the county or the taxpayers in their entirety. And to think a brick and mortar structure is serving all, I don't buy that. But and I'm going to put aside the retention piece for a moment. There are people hurting. And so if 11% of the data that we saw here on the food insecurity presentation, in theory, it's 11% of our employees that are hurting. I mean, it's a blanket. They just don't take the top, 30% of the wage earners in the county and say 11% over here. It's a top to bottom impact, and that's, I think, why this relief formula, it's not perfect by any means, and not many of us like it because it does cause great distress among people up here. But if we want to reach everyone, sometimes a vast majority or more people, then we have to dive into these tough discussions and this is tough. I mean, I feel like this is a way that we can help people in our county and their families. And it's a prescribed way we can do it. And the money is not, we're not going to return it, right?
Money's not what?
We're not going to return the funds, are we?
Well, you know, but believe it or not,
Yes or no?
believe it or not, initially, I was gonna support returning the 30+ million back to the federal government because it is inflationary. Now, I'm not gonna make it because everybody's gonna think I'm absolutely insane with that thought. And if we give it back, they're gonna give it to somebody else, and I understand all of that.
All three commissioners considered that.
Yeah.
Giving that money back. That was all three commissioners that said, is this worth it? And then the conclusion that we came to is somebody's going to spend it. It might as well be Johnson County because and this is what we need to understand. This money is already there. It's already allotted. It's already earmarked. So it's already spent. To say that we're using it unfairly, that money that's already spent of our taxpayer money, I disagree with that, Ron. If I could help every person in this county, I'd love to. I'd love to help every person in this county, but we have an opportunity to help those that we touch the closest right now. And that's what I look at. I look at that in my company and I look at that in this county. These are the people that I can touch and I can legitimately do it in funds that are already spent. Why wouldn't I? What in my conscience can tell me don't help people? I don't get it, Ron. And I'm sorry. I'd love to help everybody, but I can only help those people that I'm touching right now. That's all I can do.
That's for sure. And you can help them all you want to help them. What I'm saying is it justifiable? Is it an appropriate thing to do? Is it fair to the taxpayers of this county who are paying their taxes? You're actually distributing their money. It's not our money. It's their money they've paid in. And you can spend it any way you want to. You could give huge bonuses. That's up to you and your conscience. If you guys can live with that, then amen. That's what you do. I'm just telling you that I think it's wrong. And the sheer consideration of it, in my thinking, is wrong.
And in response to Ron's suggestion, you could bring forward any one of those impacts. That does allow for small businesses to be considered as part of this ARPA funding. And it does allow for housing and homelessness. There are many programs that have been that could be brought forward that this committee or people on this committee have not suggested. I brought forth 3 and 2 have been approved to go forward with further funding. 1 wasn't. But other than mental health and buildings for mental health on the campus, I have not seen or heard other specific programs. Animal shelter, we've got all those, but all the ones that you're suggesting under the, correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, the kinds of things that Ron suggested are allowable expenses to be considered, and no one's brought those forward that I've read or heard or observed.
All I'm saying is what you bring forward should be fair and equitable. That's all I'm saying. And you can look at what we have approved, the animal shelter, that's fair and equitable. That's serving the people of the county. There's a variety of things that we can do with those funds that's serve the people of the county. I'd like to see more money put into parks and recreation, give the honest, hardworking taxpayer out there a little something for his money.
Well, then bring a project forward and we'll consider it.
I'm going to, but I thought if I brought pickleball up today after all of this, it probably wouldn't fly.
Rob, you were mid sentence.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear you finish. I'd like to hear you finish what you had to
No,
say.
it's all right. I was kind of, Ron kind of got to it, Ron Deere before me, is that this list of, eligible workers, and they give some examples, those, you could probably go through small businesses impacted and family or childcare. How many stories I've heard about family or childcare in the county and the lack thereof, and how this move, how the pandemic impacted a small in-home operator or a smaller childcare provider in the county. Those are those are eligible uses, and those are the small business owners who are employing others and helping the mom, dad, guardian, whomever, go to their job to earn a living. So it's there. It's there. You just gotta, that's what you want to do. And I think I view what we're talking about today is this is our front line. This is our frontline people. And we have the ability to go through this in compliance with Treasury guidelines and with help from Baker Tilly and make this happen for folks that we have the most immediate, to Mr. Baird's comments, the most immediate touch. And then beyond that, I'm open to those small businesses in our community that were hurt. If that gets it out there and they can justify it, we can check the boxes, then yeah.
And I can give you one example that you're all familiar with, and it's just, we can beat this drum all the way around, but small business I was involved with was Cater Cabaret that shut down, which was entertainment, but it shut down because of the COVID. And it is a potential eligible, so that kind of business is a potential eligible, not that anybody would support, so bringing Cater Cabaret, but it's just an example of a small business that shut down specifically, and there are many out there. I mean, but again, it's our responsibility, as I understand it, to bring forward the suggested programs, and I would encourage the committee members to do that.
Andy Barnhart, Chief Deputy at the Sheriff's Office. Just simply because my department was mentioned specifically, we absolutely have had a higher turnover rate that can be supported by numbers within the last 3 years, just 4 years of our administration. The turnover rate specifically for correctional officers has gotten worse. Our cooks in the jail, there is no question. And right now, because of the amount of training that's involved in a correctional officer, we are hemorrhaging out money in our overtime budget. The only reason we've been able to not come to the council for additional appropriations on overtime is because we've had so many vacant spots that we're able to use that money to pay those people. So in terms of actual dollars and cents, we are losing money. And one of the issues is retention. Marion County has a $5,000 sign-on bonus for correctional officers. And I believe it's $5,000 for anyone that's been there also to retain them. So it is direct competition and people are directly leaving for that. We have a full-time lieutenant who pretty much all she does is hire people because we have never been fully staffed. I think she told me we were fully staffed for 6 days, as long as we've been fully staffed in the jail. So it absolutely is. I can get you the exact numbers, but we are losing money in general because of retention issues. Now, whether that offsets it or not to you, I can't answer that.
So do you think $2,500 one time is going to solve that?
I don't think it's going to solve it. No, I don't think there's any one thing that's going to
That's
solve
what
any
I'm-
of this, but the
And that's
money
what
is.
I'm saying. I don't
I
think
will
it's
agree
going to
with
solve
Commissioner
it.
Baird, though, that this money has already been spent, it's already been collected from the taxpayer. It's given to the feds. It's now come back to us. Why in the world would we give it back to the federal government who blows through our money and has put us in the situation that we're in instead of using it locally? That's the part that, sir, I can't understand where you would think that let give it back. It's already spent. We're not asking for more money from the taxpayer. It's already gone out of their checking accounts. Let's give it back to those that we can. That's how I would do it. It's not going to solve the problem, but it'll help. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to motion that this committee through ordinance and proper channels, I guess, appropriate amount not to exceed $1.7 million for that bucket of those who are eligible through premium pay and then the retention component of it. I find that's important to make sure that that the audit, I believe the gentleman from Baker Tilly talked about, would probably be an audit from a Department of Treasury or somebody engaged by them to ensure our compliance was appropriate on the front end. And I just want there to be those checks in place so we can defend the decision, say we complied. But the motion is not to exceed $1.7 million in a combination of premium pay and or retention for payable in fiscal year 2022.
I'm gonna second that, other than it's $300,000 less than what I put on the table early on in this.
It is.
I
was
thought
more.
we talked about $2 million, or was it just
I
a
would-
million?
I went back to the minutes. The minutes said $1 million.
Was it just a million?
Yeah.
Okay,
That's what I had too.
okay.
Well, you made a comment that you thought it would be closer to 2 million, but we didn't.
We didn't have any statistics, we didn't have any numbers, we didn't have
Right.
all that brought down. So I'm seconding it.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion?
I could be a lot more.
Yeah, I know. And I'm just gonna say this, I said from day one, being on this committee and being involved with these funds was a lose-lose situation for all of us up here. And it's gonna continue to be a lose-lose. And I don't think there's any way to win in this. But I think there is a way that we can, in our own consciences, in our own personal selves, make decisions based on what we feel is right and what we feel is wrong. And I can't say what any other person on this committee feels is right or wrong. That's in their conscience and in their heart and in their prayers and in their mind. But in my conscience, it is clear. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. Consideration for funding for certain county roads. This will be a blessing to talk about.
This committee had talked about a $3 million set aside for roads. Our highway department identified $1.5 million in subdivisions with the caveat it's outside White River Township to serve the rest of the county. They have found 1.5 million in those subdivisions. There is another 17 roads that meet a PACER rating outside, and I can give you the list maybe in a minute. Do you have?
Is that what was sent to us by Sheena?
Yeah.
Yes, you've got that list of
We got it.
roads.
Yeah.
And to be transparent, I wanted everybody to know that that 1.5 had been talking about subdivisions. These are other roads outside of those subdivisions, just to make it clear and transparent. That would be what this other $1.5 million would be used for, if this committee is okay with that.
So what's the total again?
The total was 3 to start with, but it's 1.5. And I put that, they've come up with 1.5 to use in subdivisions, okay? The other 1.5 million would be used for these roads, these 17 roads listed here.
It would have helped if he could have been a little more specific in what he was going to do on those roads that you mentioned. I drove some of them yesterday.
It's going to be a combination. There's some resurfacing and some chip and seal. And to be fair and honest, this meeting came along pretty quick after we learned the availability. Yeah, there it is. So, I mean, I can get more detailed with you if you want on what they're actually going to do on these roads. If you want to know if it's going to be a resurface or if it's going to be chip seal, that's going to be your two options here. None of them, I don't think, have reconstruction plans in them. So
I think though, in our minds, is this enough? Doing enough for the roads, or is there more we can do that maybe we can consider?
yeah, I mean, I would like to take this as a phase or a step process, as we've done, as we talked about earlier with the food pantry and help for that. We need to see where we're going to be with this, and if there's any other things that come to the top of the plate for us on this, and not just go gung ho and spend all this money. Be smart, patient, to look through this. I just think 3 million right now is a good starting point. I will come back, and I know Commissioner West will probably be arm in arm. looking for more money for roads, because there's always that need out there.
It's out of the discretionary budget, correct?
Yes, out of last revenue.
All right, and so as we look at our totals as they are on the chart, you know, the discretionary is not endless. It is 10 million. And again, I have suggested at each meeting, if anybody has any other projects that they think should be considered, this was one that came from the very beginning. So it's been, that 3 million has been there. 1.5 million has already been allocated by the council. And at the wish of the committee, the suggestion was 3, and that you would come back and be more specific, which you have done. And so that would now come to 1.5 after an ordinance by you guys and then to the council. So the process is being followed, and we are allocating funds out of that 10 million. So, you know, if it's a point I've made that we've got the 2 buckets, then, you know, if we can have suggestions of what the total would be, and then we would start eliminating those who are not, you know, projects are not reasonable and acceptable, then, you know, we would make, what we're doing is, well, it should 3 million, maybe it should be 6 million, maybe it should be 8 million. I agree with Commissioner Wald on that, you know, because we're facing, what'd you tell her, what's the number, Rob or John? We're facing 100 million.
Oh, you keep going, you're about $350 million.
350, there's so many things that have been thrown at us, so.
But we want to be prudent with this. We just don't want to throw money at it. And it's going to take highway a time to get through and rate these roads. I mean, we've got, you know, huge projects up in White River Township that will be coming down the pike. I mean, massive projects. So this is a way, an opportunity for this board to look outside of that demographic area and be able to help other parts of the county. So that's, I'm just asking for consideration of this other $1.5 million to go outside of the subdivisions as it was stated in the prior ordinance.
Yeah, I'm in support of it. I know that council will be considering, and commissioners will be considering other means for funding the grand total that's coming through the tunnel at us with a bright headlight. So I think this is a kind of a stopgap, if I might say, that keeps us from getting into cash reserves.
It's a Band-Aid on a gaping wound.
There you go.
Amen.
So I'm in for it.
I think that the 3 million's already been approved. as
Yes,
far as
it's
that.
just,
So-
this is transparent, being clear,
Okay.
because we talked about.
So basically, we're saying we're just moving forward with
If
the
this
other.
committee is good with moving forward with that
I'll have-
1.5.
I'll draft another ordinance with those specific
Yeah.
roads included, and then we'll go to.
So
council in
basically,
July.
we're looking for a consensus.
Yes.
Because it's already been approved.
Yep.
So
That's good.
everybody.
And that
good?
was my point. We've already approved
Yeah.
it, so let's do it.
Okay. Update on Hospital Road Campus project.
You'd set me out to look with Wes Harrison on this, to look at a layout for the campus that we had discussed. And this is where we are at right now. And you can see by the labeling and identifying the property, what all is there. We put this together preliminarily for consideration to look at, and if anybody sees anything, and you can have some time to digest this. I'm not asking for any motions, anything. I want you to digest this. If you've got questions, to reach out to Wes or I. Oh, we already got a hand up, but I'm not done talking yet. So I'm gonna run us out another 5 minutes and then we'll be done.
No, before you go on, I don't see his stamp on here anywhere.
This is non-structural right now. But this is the layout we've done. We are significantly under what we had allocated from this board for that right now. But the more changes that we do, it's going to cost more money. So I'll just leave it at that. So you can just, this is just digest, look at it, review it, see what you think. If you want to add, subtract, delete, that's it. So that was the only thing I was going to do, is pass these out to you and give you an update of where we were at. So here's where we're at. Wes, you want to add anything?
Wes Harrison, project manager. And the thing as you look at this is we've kind of got 4 buildings closer to the jail. And right now, that's based on what conversations we've had in the past as far as proximities go. It does allow for future construction down at the southeast corner of the building or of the site if we wanted to add on in the future for any other facilities. What's not shown here is stuff like green space. We need some green space for the employees that are going to be on site. There's areas for dumpsters, stuff like that. The one thing that this does accomplish too, with a footbridge across the creek down at the south end, it allows for some additional parking for the training center, the sheriff's training center, which is severely limited right now. So this will allow for some additional parking for them. And again, this is just a way to do it. It's not the way to do it necessarily, but it's a way to do it. And I think the footprints that we've got shown here do identify the approximate sizes of the buildings based on what we've talked about so far program wise. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to Kevin or myself and we'll work through it. So.
Just out of curiosity, on your titles, when you say courts building, what parameters are you?
Well, I think that was to minimize the amount of travel back and forth to the courthouse with the inmates. So they've got someplace on site that they can meet and not have the transfer back and forth to the courthouse. It just made that operation a lot more simple to where we didn't have the security issues of going back and forth downtown from the jail with the inmates. So it was to have a courts building on the site of the campus site here. So,
But when you,
Well, please keep in mind with this, it's not going to be August 1st, we're going to start construction on all of this.
no.
This is going to be phased over a number of years, and I think you're going to see different needs arise as this goes forward. But it's going to give you the capabilities to be able to put it on this site with this size restrictions in place. So it's kind of it's going to be moving constantly, as Wes and I have seen already. But it's just a placeholder for things right now.
Yeah.
As far as any explanation, we probably won't get real deep into the weeds on that because we won't be able to answer those legitimately.
Yeah, it was just one of the things I hadn't heard the committee consider.
And there's going to be, I mean, to be honest with you, there's probably going to be a couple of buildings that would be first on the docket that I would look at. And I'll share those. I would say the health department coroner's office would be one, and I would say community corrections would be two. Those would be the top things on my priority as the site develops, because this is a big development, large development, and it's going to take time. It's going to go over a period of years. So, but those would be my first two that I would really stand on strongly and look at.
And when you say community correction, are you including adult probation?
If it's in the same building, and like I said, this is.
Well, I'm just looking at
It's not according to the plan.
on the map.
Yeah.
yeah.
And we can do that. We can do multi-story. There's a lot of factors that come into this. This is just basically our thoughts coming off the very top. It hadn't been, will the city of Franklin let us go with a multi-story building? There's so many questions that, on-site detention. We run into so many different things, as John, you can well be aware of. But this is just kind of for discussion and for just to look at.
And I think all of us will probably have different priorities on what we think's.
Sign the paper, mark them up and see what you want to do. Redline them, and feed them back to us. That's all we're asking.
Anything else?
Thank you. Nice job, Wes.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Wes.
It's before we dismiss, do you have any suggestions of what the next meeting might be about?
I have no clue.
Well, I would suggest again.
It takes a while to
those who have not,
Recovered.
those who have not put forward recommendations.
I would still, please, if you have recommendations, please get those to everybody and we can look at those. I think the hardest thing to deal with is surprises. So if we can maybe get that out ahead of time would be great.
Just remain balanced, good mental health.
Is Dan still on?
I'm with that.
Is he? I have a
I'm
question.
still here.
He's already trading lunch.
Hi, Dan. Thanks for hanging in there with us. One of the questions, while we have you here with us today, you probably don't have the benefit of this aerial that was provided of this campus that we're considering. But one of the facilities mentioned, potentially is a mental health facility. And I see that under that public health pillar, if you will, or bucket, behavioral health facilities and equipment is one that seems to be eligible. So is it possible on a when we have a campus setting that one structure we might be able to use designated or what we're calling regulatory funds? And how, and if that answer is yes, in other words, can we have a mix of maybe it's general fund dollars or other sources of funds along with a behavioral health facility if it's permitted? Can those funds be commingled in a way? I hesitate to use that word, but that's one question. And two, if that facility is eligible, then that facility has a piece of the overall parking requirements and drainage requirements. Can those things be kind of prorated based on the prospective use of the site? Yeah.
Good question. And there is broad latitude to use ARPA dollars for mental health purposes. So to the extent that there's costs associated with using that building, prorated costs, all that would just need to be written into your justification for the dollars that you allocate and appropriate to that project. And like with everything else, we've got to go back to the guidance and make sure that there isn't something that prevents or says that you can't do it. And then assuming that that's not the case, then we write it in the write it in the project description, write it in the justification, and that becomes part of your budget. And to your other question about commingling, you're certainly able to use other dollars from other funds towards this project as well, to the extent that you go through your public process to determine if that's the how you want to use those funds.
Well, and there was a question 1 or 2 meetings ago that Sheena basically said, and there was some reaction that we had from the committee that you can't answer the question. He said we were going to ask Baker Tilly. Does anybody recall specifically what
was that due into the health department of what was available and what was not available?
I don't remember.
When you reacted that,
Well, I think the reaction is going to be, Dan's going to have the same reaction. I mean, if you don't know what you want to pay for, we can't tell you, where it can be paid from. So when we try to break down some of these projects into smaller pieces, some of which may be qualified under the regulatory bucket, if you will, portions of them may not be. So that's where the lost revenue or maybe other funds would come in. And Dan's nodding, so I think we're on the same page.
Yes.
I don't remember what the specific question was, but I know it's kind of the gist of our discussion.
and I think our struggle as committee members, at least my personal struggle on that, is that you tell me how I can spend it. And then, I'll formulate opinions of you're saying, where does it come from? And we're saying, okay, if we have a building, there's a coroner in the health department and 50% of it is the health department and 50% is coroner. Can we spend regulatory and or the discretionary on that? And you can't answer it until we say, here's what we want. Is that the chicken and the egg in this particular situation?
Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
So, who asked what and when, and, his putting together
Well-
these plans brings it down to saying, here's the concept. And then when we start allocating how it's going to be funded, if it's a $5 million building for coroner and health department, 2.5 million could be out of discretionary, 2.5 million could be out of regulatory. But until the decision is made that we're going to build a quote unquote a $5 million building,
I
that you
think
can't answer it.
it goes to what Dan said earlier, where you kind of have to decide what you want.
Right.
And we go and assess where it would be paid from and what the risk would be associated with paying it from a particular source or bucket, if you will,
Yeah, I agree.
right?
Who for
Thank you,
adjournment?
Dan.
Hey, we did good.
Second.
Who was it, Kevin?
Yes.
I have a motion by Commissioner Walls and a second by Councilman John Myers. For adjournment. We're adjourned. Thank you very much.
When's our next meeting? You don't know? Okay.